Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about the settings features in Haiku. So the majority of what we're going to talk about will actually be covered in the Quick Start Guide, which is part of the documentation. So if after the fact you want to go back and look through that in writing or see these things side by side, that's where you can find most of what we're going to talk about. Okay, so I'm in the dashboard of one of my demo tenants. And if you look on the side, we've gone over what some of these menus are. And if you are a tenant editor, you also have access under configuration to a submenu called settings. And this is where you're going to handle all of the setup of your tenant and all of the specific kinds of functionalities you want to give it, as well as the look and feel. So I'm going to walk through each of these things in the setting menu one by one. And for appearance and features, we'll come back later and do a more in-depth training on just what's in those because they're a bit more complicated. So the first thing under the settings menu is the contact. So this is the contact email that you would like the contact page to send emails to. So by default, your Palsy tenants all have a contact page with a contact form. The email that you put in there will be the email address that will receive those. Right now, you should stick to just one email there. So if you want it to go to more than one person, we'd recommend setting up a distribution list. Next is the labels. So there is a database behind Haiku that will put these separate labels into some specific fields, which will then use them later on in parts of the interface and in the deposit agreement and things like that. So you can see in the settings for this tenant, I have Palsy Shared Collections as the application name, and that shows up here in Palsy Shared Collections. This Palsy Shared Collections over here is different, and I'll go over that in a second. You'll also see this piece of information getting piped into the deposit agreement if you use it, and the terms of use, I believe. Of the three labels, Palsy Shared Collections is the most important. It's the one that we've found gets reused the most, but it's likely it's worthwhile to fill in the other ones as well. But this one should be your default. So if I were to change this and save, I should see over here, if I refresh, that it has updated here. So it's a real-time update. Then next we have the Appearance tab, and the Appearance tab has lots of sub navigation that changes the kind of look and design and controls to some degree some of the features and the language that's used in your repository. We're going to go over this in a separate training in more depth. So I'm just going to point out now that all of your things having to do with logos, your kind of default thumbnails for item types, your colors, fonts, and themes are all handled in the Appearance submenu. The next area is collection types. We go over this a little bit in creating collections, but just to give you a little bit more detail, Haiku is set up to create different types of collections. Everything comes as default with these two types of collections, admin set and collection or user collection, it's sometimes called. You can't remove these two. These two are functional and required to be able to use your Haiku tenant. The admin set is a special kind of collection. It is not apparent to the user on the front end. It's used for administrative management of materials. So let's say you have materials that are all managed by your special collections, and so all need to have the same staff who can add materials and describe materials and remove materials. All of those things that are part of your special collections, then you'd want to have in the same admin set. You can have the same people involved in the permissions and workflow of that. We'll go over more detail of admin set and collection in the collections and admin sets more advanced training. You can also, from this screen, Theoretically, you can edit, you can change the names of these things, but actually for the most part, these are grayed out because they're default collection types and have to be used this way. So the other one, collection then, or user collection, for most of you, we've changed the name of this to just collection to avoid some confusion. But in Hyku, these are called user collections because these are the collections that are then visible to users in the interface. Collections, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. So these are more for thematic collections. So let's say in the previous example, we have lots of materials that have been uploaded by our special collections department. From that, we may to the public want to present those as multiple kind of thematic collections or provenance-based collections. That's where we would use this collection type to create those various collections. So I might create a collection type for our Civil War collections. I might create a Civil War collection that is of the collection type for that use case. So you can create new collection types. This would be if you have a very kind of unusual test case or use case where you want to create a collection that has some slightly different functionality than your typical user collections or admin sets. Technically speaking, any new collection type you create, Hyku will think of as a user collection and not an admin set. But you can make some slight changes in the settings here. So you can change, you can, excuse me, you can change whether or not the users can make specific viewers for their collections. You can change whether or not those are discoverable collections. You can choose whether or not those collections can be branded. So again, this is a pretty kind of fringe use case, but it is possible to do this. You can also dictate which groups are participators who can create these kinds of collections. So you may want to create a collection type that allows specific users to be able to create those kinds of collections. And you can do that from this menu. As I said, this is probably not something that you'll need to use that much, but I just wanted to go over it to help you explain why this is here and what you technically can do with it. As you can see, I cannot delete admin sets or collections, those are required, but I can delete my test collection that I just made. Okay, going back then. Next in our settings menu are pages. So the pages, there are 4 static pages that appear in Hyku. Right now, we do not have the ability to add more than that. That's something that if it was of interest to you, you should let us know. But in every Hyku main navigation, you'll see 2 of these pages, the About page and the Help page. So you can add any kind of text you'd like here. This is a basic WYSIWYG kind of format for adding some formatting. The other 2 pages are the Deposit Agreement and the Terms of Use. These both come pre-loaded by the Hyku application. You can delete this and add your own. These 2 will only show up if you have specific features enabled. So the deposit agreement will show up as part of the work creation process. It'll show up in the sidebar when I try to create a work if I have enabled that in the features, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the only way you would see that deposit agreement is in this repository right now. I don't have the deposit agreement available, so that didn't work out the way I thought it would. But that's where the deposit agreement shows during the work creation process, and it's visible to the depositors of work. And I'll show that in a second when I go through the features. The other one then is the terms of use. And again, this is filled in by default by Hyku. The terms of use will show if you are in a repository where you have enabled this share your work button on the home page, and it will appear as part of that. And so you can see here, now I'm seeing the terms of use, and you can also see, in this case, Policy Commons is the application name in this repository. It's a different one than the one I have open over here. And so that's where it's getting pre-filled in from what I've filled in those labels. Content blocks are kind of similar to pages, but they're a little bit different in that these are just small areas of text that appear within the homepage, and different ones are available for different themes in sort of different places. The first one, announcement text, is really only for use in some kind of emergency situation. It typically is not a part of the interface. The announcement text appears in a big red band across the page. And this would be for some kind of system alert or some kind of important notification. So typically you won't have the announcement text filled in. As long as this is blank, it won't show up on the home page. So you won't have just a red bar there with nothing in it. So if I come back over here and refresh, it should not be there. Marketing text is the text that appears within the banner area or the hero image area. So you can see I've got Policy Shared Collections here. On this theme, it shows up here as part of this large image. If I was back here in the Policy Commons, it shows up here in the upper menu banner. In this one, which uses our what we call neutral theme, it would show up in here. I think I don't have it filled in this one. And in the default, it also shows up within this banner image. It's also not filled in this one. So they are in slightly different places depending on the theme that you use, but marketing text is for a short piece of information that appears within this image area. And again, you can leave that blank if you don't want it to appear. Homepage text appears in some different places on different themes. So here on the cultural heritage theme, it shows up here in this box. You can find out where the specific pieces of information would appear by going back to the appearance setting and looking at the image previews that it shows you here with the themes. We'll go through that in more detail in the appearance and themes training. The last content block is for a block called Featured Researcher. And that is similar to the homepage text in that it will appear in its own block. I have it filled in this demo IR that we have. And you can see that it allows you to use formatting, and you can have pictures in there and other things to make this area attractive or compelling if you'd like to use it. Features is something I'm going to go over in more depth in another training section. But you can see there are lots of what are called feature flippers, which control specific things that are important for specific areas of functionality within Hyku. So some of them are dependent on theme, some of them are general across all of the different repository themes. For example, I have show deposit agreement here, which was previously off. I turned it on. Now when I come back here to this add a new work dialog, I should see a link to the deposit agreement here. So that's an example of one of the feature flippers, and I'll go over all of them again in a different training. All right. And finally, there are available work types. So right now in Hyku, we only have 4 work types. If you know for sure, for example, that you will never be using the ETD work type, you can remove it in this setting, and it will never appear as an option when someone tries to create a new work. So I've removed ETD here. And if I come back over here to create a new work and I start all over again, sorry, going back to my works menu and add a new work, I now do not have ETD as an option here. So this could be something that would be useful to you if you're really using your repository for only one feature, to not give your depositors the option of accidentally adding something in the wrong work type. This is like all of the other things and features applicable to the entire repository. So it's not particular to a specific group, a specific collection, or a specific group of users, but it is something that can simplify things. And as we may be adding more work types over time, it may help you to simplify your workflows. So that is the basic overview of settings. If there is any questions right now, we can do that. And if not, then I think we will be finished for today.
Thanks, Gretchen. There was one question in the chat that I will read just for the purpose of the recording. Is featured researcher something that rotates or updates automatically, or does it need to be updated manually? And Nick answered that it needs to be updated manually. I don't know if you had anything else to add.
No, right now these boxes are just kind of static designations for you to add content. In fact, this label featured researcher is not a default. So you can actually use that section for something completely different. It's called featured researcher, but really all it is that within the themes, we've provisioned 2 areas for you to put text. So if I wanted to have, say, on my homepage, a content block that was my, this is who we are and this is what we're doing. And then in featured researcher, I wanted to put our hours of operation. I could do that instead. So it's called featured researcher, and that's because that's how Hyku was originally designed. And it is kind of the intent of having that second content block, but it's a way that you can actually customize a little bit more. If the theme allows you to has provision for both the homepage text and the featured researcher, you can actually use those 2 for whatever you want. They're just 2 areas to add text to the homepage.
Are there any other questions about basic configuration settings? All right, hearing none, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.